I had already peeled the carrots. Chicken was resting in the broth, lid tilted just enough to let it breathe. The towels in the downstairs bathroom were fresh, white, folded properly. I even trimmed the dying basil. Not for the flavor, but because it made the kitchen smell like someone lived here. When Rachel called, I thought it was to finalize the packing list. Just stay home, she said lightly, the way someone brushes lint off a sleeve. It'll be more peaceful for you. We're all a bit tired. Then she hung up. I stood there holding the grocery list I had written in my best pen, the ink still wet near motion sickness bands. She used to get queasy as a child. I remembered. I always remembered. She had told me we were all going on the cruise. Her husband, the boys. Me. I sent my share of the deposit early, before anyone asked. It felt good to contribute. But somewhere between we and just stay home, I vanished. No explanation. No argument. Just removed, like something you delete from a sentence, only after you read it aloud and decide it sounds better without. The world outside the window was unchanged. The rosemary bush still crooked from wind. The street still empty at this hour. Inside, I swept a floor that didn't need sweeping. And for the first time in 10 years, I heard what silence actually sounded like. I never called it sacrifice. That word always sounded too grand, like something you do for an audience. What I did because it needed doing. 3 jobs, 2 shifts, nights on my feet so long the bones in my ankles hummed by morning. There were evenings when dinner was crackers and a storybook, when Rachel slept on the couch with half her homework done and I carried her to bed without waking her. That was life. Love, for me, was never a feeling. It was action. It was a clean uniform. Gas in the car. Shoes that fit. A mother who never asked to be thanked because the only thanks I ever wanted was in their safety, fed, warm, unafraid. When my husband died, I didn't collapse. The grief was dense, yes, but silent. I mourned through motion. I patched the roof myself with a borrowed ladder. I sold the car with the bad radiator and learned the bus schedule. I stretched groceries and took the night shift at a pharmacy, wearing a too-tight vest with someone else's name stitched into it. Rachel was 26 by then, newly married. When she got pregnant, I moved into the spare room to help, she said. Just for a little while. 10 years ago. Temporary became routine. I didn't mind. I cooked. I folded. I kept things smooth. That was the agreement, spoken or not. I was a helper. Helpers don't ask. They don't expect. They maintain. And in that house, bright and loud and filled with Rachel's new traditions, I became a kind of backdrop. Not ignored, not unloved, just assumed. Her husband called me Eve, which I hated. It was a shortcut. I had never been an Eve. At first, I felt useful. I watched the boys while they built their careers, gave them time to be young parents without drowning. Rachel would say, "You saved us." And that was enough. But things shifted slowly. The way they always do. You don't see it until the shape is already changed. I started hearing my name less. I was referred to, not addressed. "She'll be home with the kids," Rachel said on the phone once. Not Mom. Not Evelyn. Just a pronoun. I heard her laugh with her sister-in-law about planning a girls' trip. "We'll finally have a break. No extra bodies this time," she'd said. Extra bodies. I pressed the phone into the receiver with care and went back to folding laundry. Shirts I didn't wear. Socks I didn't own. At dinner, she asked me if I wanted more salad, but didn't wait for an answer. Her husband was telling a story about work. Everyone laughed except me. I hadn't heard the beginning. The boys used to climb into my lap with sticky hands and stories about the moon. Now they ran past me with controllers and earbuds. They didn't mean to forget, they just did. I told myself this was normal. Children grow. Families shift. You make space. But lately, that space had started to feel like absence. Rachel bought a new guest towel set, plush, ivory. I thought it was for me. I found it boxed in the hall closet, tagged for her mother-in-law's upcoming visit. My towel was the frayed one. Blue. It used to be hers, from college. She told me once, "You're not a guest, you're family." And I believed her. Until this morning. Until that call, that voice soft with false concern. "We're all a bit tired." I stood in my small room, its window facing the neighbor's brick wall, and realized how long it had been since someone asked what I wanted. Not out of obligation. Just because. That's when I opened the drawer with my paperwork, the cruise confirmation. I hadn't looked at it since I sent the deposit. My name wasn't on the main itinerary anymore. But it was still there. Stand by. A word that meant, if someone else falls through, you'll do. I closed the drawer and sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress sagged where I always sat. I traced the line of the curtain with my finger. I didn't cry. Instead, I reached for my purse. Found the small notebook I used to track expenses. My pension, my savings. Modest. Enough. More than once, I'd offered to help. To cover gaps. To make things easier. Not this time. They hadn't asked. I opened my laptop. The old one with the sticking E key. Typed in the cruise website. Found my booking. And quietly, without drama, without permission, I clicked Upgrade Cabin. Ocean View. Private Balcony. Priority Boarding. The total appeared. I stared at the number, then pressed Confirm. The page loaded. Confirmation number. New itinerary. That's when something loosened inside me. Not anger. Not pride. Just space. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. I packed lightly. 3 dresses, 1 pair of sandals, my straw hat with the soft ribbon, folded carefully between layers of tissue. The same one I wore on my honeymoon, when Martin and I spent 5 days in a borrowed cabin near the coast, cooking beans on a hot plate and laughing at the gulls. I hadn't thought of that trip in years. But now, the memory rose unbidden, clear, sun-warmed. His hand on the small of my back, steadying me on a dune. The way he'd say, "Look at you, Evie. You were made for salt air." Salt air. I arrived at the terminal early. Hours before the crowd. The porter greeted me by name. He took my suitcase with both hands, gentle, respectful. He didn't glance past me, didn't look for someone else. "Concierge guests, this way," he said. The lounge was cool and quiet. Almond coffee, fresh pastries, a pianist playing something soft enough to think over. The carpet muted every footstep. No plastic chairs. No noise. Just calm. I sat by the window, watching families gather outside. Toddlers clinging to tired mothers, men yelling over suitcases, teenagers rolling their eyes at everything. I used to belong in that chaos. Now, I didn't. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't long for it. When the ship began boarding, my section was called first. I didn't rush. I stood slowly, felt the bones of my knees respond, and walked with care. The woman ahead of me was younger, maybe late 40s, loud on the phone. She glanced back once, clearly expecting me to need help. I didn't. My stateroom was larger than I expected. White linens, navy trim. A bowl of fruit, a folded note, "Welcome, Mrs. Hastings." The glass door opened onto a private balcony. I stepped outside and inhaled. There it was. Salt air. I sat, kicked off my shoes, and let the quiet fill me. No one knew I was here. No one waited. No one needed me. And in that, there was freedom. Later, I wandered the ship. Took the elevator to the top deck. Found a corner of the art gallery. Signed up for a watercolor class. I hadn't held a paintbrush in decades. At dinner, I chose a window seat for one. The waiter hesitated only slightly. "Dining alone?" "Yes," I said evenly. "I prefer it." He nodded, and I could tell, he believed me. The sea was dusky gold by the time dessert arrived. I didn't rush. I let the spoon linger. Sugar and lemon. Across the dining room, a family laughed over a spilled glass of juice. I watched without envy. I wasn't part of them. But I wasn't left behind either. I had stepped elsewhere. In the morning, I walked the upper deck barefoot before breakfast. No one else was out yet. The sky still a cool pale blue. I paused by the railing and closed my eyes. The breeze lifted my hair gently, like fingers. I wore the cotton dress I had packed, just in case. A dress I'd saved for an occasion that never came. Until now. Someone brushed past behind me, a child running, feet slapping joyfully on deck. A small voice laughed, "Nana, look at me." I didn't turn. It wasn't mine. But I smiled all the same. That afternoon, I saw them. Rachel and her family. Near the pool. Her husband in sunglasses. The boys tugging at floaties. Rachel stretched out with a drink, laughing at something shallow. She hadn't seen me yet. I stood still for a moment, watching them. Not with bitterness. Not even sorrow. Just clarity. She had made a decision. And so had I. When I turned to walk away, I didn't feel small. I felt unburdened. I stopped by the gift shop, bought myself a silk scarf the color of sea glass, and wore it that evening. I tied it around my neck like a talisman. That night, the moon rose full. The waves beneath us steady. I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea and read from a book I'd started 3 times over the years but never finished. No one interrupted. No one asked for anything. And in that silence, something healed. The third day passed quietly, like a long exhale. I skipped the excursion to the island market. Instead, I stayed aboard. Painted for an hour in the solarium, a pale fig tree in a ceramic pot, its leaves trembling slightly in the draft. I thought of Martin. He had once tried to grow a fig in our backyard. It hadn't survived the frost. By midday, I returned to my suite. The steward had refreshed the linens. A new towel folded like a swan perched on the bed. There was a chocolate on the pillow. Luxury was not a language I had spoken in years. But I was remembering. I wandered the decks until I reached the pool. That's when Rachel saw me. She was standing near the shallow end, sunglasses atop her head, talking to a couple with matching straw hats. Her laughter stopped mid-sentence when her eyes met mine. There was a flicker in her face, something shifting too quickly to catch. Surprise. Then calculation. Then irritation, polished over with a tight smile. "Mom?" Just that. Flat. Unsure whether to acknowledge or deny. I nodded. One small motion. Then I kept walking. I didn't stop. Didn't wait for her to close the distance between us. Once, I would have. I would have searched her face for softness, listened for apology in her tone. But not now. I passed like a breeze. Later that evening, I dined early. The maitre d' greeted me with the kind of attention given to someone who mattered. He asked if I preferred the same table by the window. I said yes. Halfway through the meal, I noticed her husband. He was seated 2 tables down with one of the boys, attempting to coax him into eating something green. His tie was crooked. He looked tired. He saw me. He nodded, polite. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. But because I had nothing left to offer in exchange for their approval. I finished my tea, left a tip, and returned to my room. The suite was warm. My scarf lay where I'd dropped it, draped across the chair. I picked it up, ran the silk between my fingers. That's when the knock came. I opened the door slowly. Rachel stood there. Alone. No drink in hand, no child on her hip. Just her, arms crossed, shoulders drawn up tight. I didn't know you were coming, she said, voice low. I know, I said. She shifted her weight. I thought it would be easier. Less stressful for you. Easier for who? She flinched slightly. I didn't mean it like that. I waited. She glanced down the hall, then back to me. I didn't remove you from the reservation. I just changed the plans. I didn't think you'd actually still come. You didn't think I'd choose myself. Silence. She looked smaller somehow, standing there without the buffer of family or busyness. Just Rachel. The girl I'd once carried in the crook of my arm when she had croup. The woman who now arranged holidays around convenience. You could have told me, I said. Even if it was hard. You owed me that much. Her jaw clenched. I didn't want a fight. There wouldn't have been one. Just honesty. She blinked, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. I didn't think you'd mind. That was worse than any excuse. That was the truth. She thought I wouldn't mind being left out. Being sidelined. Being erased. I stepped back and opened the door wider. I'm not angry, I said quietly. She looked at me, confused. Hopeful. But I'm not available either. Then I closed the door. Not hard. Not loud. Just enough. Inside, I sat on the edge of the bed and felt my pulse slow. Not available. Not the backbone of someone else's life. Not the extra body. Not the safe standby. That night, I skipped the formal event. I drew a bath. Lit the lavender candle I'd packed in case of homesickness. As I soaked, the water lapped gently against my skin. My legs, pale and soft and aging, floated weightlessly. I whispered something to myself. Not a prayer. Not a curse. Just a simple truth. I am still here. The final night came with fanfare. Lights strung like constellations across the upper decks. A masquerade theme, the cruise director announced, elegant whimsy, ocean chic. I almost didn't go. But then I saw it, folded at the bottom of my suitcase, the navy dress. Simple, high-necked, with pearl buttons that reminded me of the ones on Martin's old Sunday shirts. I had brought it on impulse. For no occasion. Now, this was the occasion. I dressed slowly. Twisted my hair into a loose knot. Pinned on the earrings Martin gave me for our 20th anniversary. He had saved for them in secret, 6 months of quiet thrift. I remember the way his hands trembled when he clasped them behind my ears. I looked at myself in the mirror. Not with judgment. Not even nostalgia. Just clarity. The woman staring back was not waiting for anyone to name her. She already had a name. I walked through the corridor alone. Heads turned, slightly. Not for beauty, not for youth, but for presence. The kind people notice without knowing why. On the deck, music played. A quartet this time, not a recording. There were masks, feathers, laughter. Couples swirling on polished wood. I didn't dance. I stood near the railing, a glass of water in hand, watching the horizon melt into indigo. That's when I saw Rachel. She was across the deck, mask in hand, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. For a moment, she looked unsure, of herself, of me, of what to say. She stepped forward, stopped. Then someone called her name, her husband, a friend, I didn't see who, and she turned away. I didn't follow. I didn't wave. I turned toward the railing and breathed. Later, back in my suite, I sat on the balcony. The wind was softer now. The sea darker. I wrote a letter. Not to Rachel. Not even to the boys. To myself. I wrote. You were not made to be an accessory. You are not a convenience. You were a mother. You gave. You loved. But you are not a hallway light, on, dependable, invisible until it burns out. You are a person. And people do not need permission to exist. I folded the paper, slid it into the back of my notebook. Then I slept. The next morning, the ship docked. I left before the others. The concierge arranged for a quiet disembarkation. No lines. No fanfare. My suitcase rolled behind me with the soft click of purpose. At the port, a taxi waited. I didn't look back. The ride home was quiet. The city passed like a dream I no longer belonged to. When I stepped into the house, Rachel's house, the one I'd helped maintain for a decade, I felt nothing. No ache. No shame. No longing. I moved through the rooms with a kind of reverence, collecting what was mine. My books. My coat. The tea tin I'd kept hidden in the back of the cabinet. The one Martin used to call my secret stash. I left the keys on the table. No note. No goodbye. She would understand. Or she wouldn't. That was no longer my concern. I took a cab to the small apartment I'd rented 2 weeks earlier, before the cruise. I hadn't told anyone. Not even the landlord knew my full name. Just E. Hastings. The place was small, 2 rooms, high windows, a radiator that clicked when it warmed. I unpacked slowly. Hung the navy dress at the back of the closet. Folded the scarf. Placed the earrings in a velvet pouch. Then I made tea. As it steeped, I opened the window. The air smelled of rain and pavement. I sat in the quiet and let it hold me. Not for what I could do. Not for what I had done. But just because I was here. And in that, was peace. 2 weeks passed before the first letter came. Not a text. Not a call. A letter. Handwritten. My name spelled out in careful loops. Mom, it began, then scratched out. Underneath, Evelyn. I sat at the window, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. Rachel wrote of the cruise. How she'd seen me by the railing. How she'd hesitated. How she realized too late that I hadn't followed her, and wouldn't. She wrote of the silence I left behind. How the boys asked where I'd gone. How her husband mentioned my absence more than once, unprompted. How the laundry didn't fold itself. How the fridge never refilled with broth. How the corners of her home began to feel oddly hollow. She ended with a sentence I hadn't expected. I didn't know how much space you filled, until it was gone. I set the letter down. Not crying. Just still. Later that afternoon, there was a knock on my apartment door. Not urgent. Not demanding. Just, present. Through the peephole, two boys. A man behind them. I opened the door. My oldest grandson stood holding a potted plant. Rosemary. For your windowsill, he said. Like the one you used to have. Behind him, Rachel's husband, quiet, respectful, nodded. No speeches. No apologies. Just presence. I stepped aside. They didn't come in. They just stood there, uncertain. Then the younger boy blurted, "Are you still mad?" I knelt, touched his cheek. "No, sweetheart. I'm just not invisible anymore." They smiled, both of them. And it was enough. They left the plant. And the space they filled lingered for hours after. That evening, I brewed rosemary tea. Turned on music I liked, not what filled someone else's silence. I sat in my little chair, by my little window, with a view that belonged only to me. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel left behind. I felt returned. Not to them. To myself.